Two, one.
Hello, and welcome to the Six Figure Developer Podcast, the podcast where we talk about new and exciting technologies, professional development, clean code, career advancement, and more. I am John Calloway.
I'm Clayton Hunt.
And I am John Ash.
With us today is Heather Downing. Heather is a passionate coder and entrepreneur. She has experience working with Fortune 500 companies building enterprise-level voice, mobile, and C#.NET applications. She focuses on external thought leadership, encouraging fellow programmers to present on topics outside of the office and in the community. Welcome, Heather.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
So Heather, before we get started, would you just tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe how you got started in the industry?
Oh, absolutely. That's always a good origin story, right? My origin story started at a movie theater, actually. I ended up going to the theater to watch a second movie on the Tron series. So this was Tron Legacy, and I was blown away by the CGI. So much so that I actually asked a friend of mine in filmmaking, how do they do that? Because it was a cutting edge at the time. He's like, well, they have all these computer programs to do that. And I said, yeah, but how did they make the computer programs that did that? And then I just kind of stepped it backwards from there. And then a few months later, I ran into a friend of mine who was going through a boot camp / like a technical certificate training kind of program here in Kansas City. It was called Centric Training. And he said, hey, if you want to learn how to do some of this stuff, I think that they'll let you sit in and watch some classes. They did. And fell in love because I actually understood half of what they were talking about, which was exciting. Thank goodness for Google to kind of help that along. And that was about 8-9 years ago. So fast forward, from there, I've definitely touched a whole lot of different enterprise level apps for sure. From like right from the get-go. Yeah, the company that I was learning from was giving, back in the day, they used to have something called Microsoft Certified Professionals. I don't think they have that anymore, but at the time they did. And so, you had to have a full, training for that. You had to do test prep and everything, just like I was like in college again. So it's pretty cool. And I did that. I've never kind of looked back. I should have always done tech, but sometimes it takes some of us longer than others to get on the right path. So this was after 11 years in hospitality. I used to work for major companies in the hotel industry and the entertainment industry, and I used to be a manager. I managed lots of people. I've done retail, and nothing gave me the satisfaction like being able to fix a problem with my own two hands. And that was awesome. And so here I am, years later.
Cool. Yeah. So what do you do these days? What do you do?
Well, these days, I get to work on lots of different kinds of client applications depending on what they need. So I've worked in the advertising industry right now for about 3 years, and it really is not too dissimilar from doing other kinds of enterprise level development. The difference is the Super Bowl doesn't move and you've got 3 weeks, so go. That's which is really fun. It also puts a big emphasis on things like continuous integration, continuous deployment. We don't have a lot of time for certain things. So we want to make sure to put a bunch of baby gates up for our team, no matter what. So I would say it was kind of like a proof of concept meets full-fledged product, in one. So I get to do a lot of different things. It changes sometimes even month to month. My longest one was like a year. I got to work on some really cool APIs. I'm kind of known as like the IoT and API chick. So that's what I do. Lots of those different things. And then, of course, over the past year and a half, 2 years, I got to do many prototypes of Alexa skills and Google Assistant skills, which are fun because there's no visuals. I don't have to worry about it. I can just build my back end. But I did have to learn a little bit about communication. So that's been really interesting lately to do.
Yeah, it seems like you're doing a lot of the really interesting things these days, IoT and mobile and voice UI. So, what's been the most challenging part of that, or what's been your favorite part of moving into these newer technologies?
I think if there was anything I could let everyone here take away, it's that when something new comes out, nobody is a master of it. Therefore, we're all equal, and it's your turn to shine. So instead of trying to really challenge people for positions that they had 10 years experience in, almost nobody was doing something like voice at the time. Back when I first started, almost nobody was doing mobile, and I just decided to kind of jump in the deep end. The great thing about that is that once somebody finds out you're doing it, you're suddenly the expert. The bad part about that is there's precious little in documentation from the tried and true, been there, went through the whole process outside of, just the normal docs that really gives you a good idea of where to go. So it requires a little bit more patience with yourself because the frustration levels are higher. Unless you know people that have done it right before you, doing that kind of bleeding or cutting edge is its own reward, but it's its own risk as well, if that makes sense. So I think my favorite part about all of that is that it didn't take too long to gain a little bit of traction and be trusted, because nobody else really wanted to do that, taking, the sword and cutting down the grass. So once you do it a little bit, then you're kind of trusted to help advise other teams. And that's probably been the biggest way I've grown, is by that.
Yeah. So you're more or less the trailblazer at that point, right?
I mean, I'm not the one who created it. I'm definitely not the one who created the documentation, but I would say I'm usually one of the first or second wave people because I'm interested, because I'm curious. That's kind of my motto, is to stay curious. So it's important to know, even if I choose not to do it, like I chose not to do React, but I was curious enough that I saw a whole lot of talks about it so I could have an idea about what it's about. You can't do everything. So pick something that you actually enjoy doing a little bit if you can. Most of the things that we get to touch now are employable. So usually you can take that skill set and go somewhere with it.
Very nice. So in your bio, you mentioned that you have a focus on external thought leadership. You want to share a little bit about that?
Sure. So it sounds like a really fancy bunch of words for you need to go out and talk about what you know. Whether you do it in person or you write it down, make a video about it, you have to share. Knowledge hoarding is the bane of our industry right now. It's because some people feel that in order to have true job security, they need to keep a lot of their knowledge to themselves. And that's not true. And not only is it not true, you oftentimes will delude yourself about how much you really know. Mm-hmm. The only way to truly drive it home is to have to teach others. So by sharing what you're doing, you are communicating it. You have to think about more than just the topic. You have to think about how it comes across to different learners. So is what you're saying going to come across to somebody who's a visual learner, an audible learner, a hands-on learner? Will it come across to each type of person, or will it only hit like a quarter of the room? Sometimes being able to communicate that is almost more valuable than just sitting in a corner yourself doing it. And oftentimes it will lead to bigger and better things. So because I noticed that I worked with so many brilliant people at the companies that I had been with and are currently at, I would oftentimes just be like, why don't you guys just go do that as a user group? Just talk about this topic there. Like, oh, no, I'll let people who are extroverts do that. And I'm like, well, then none of us would do this because we all chose to hide in our group for a reason. I'm a practiced extrovert. I'm not naturally one. I have had to learn. So I get nervous every time before I talk. I get nervous before I even do interviews, even if no matter how nice the interviews are. I also doubt myself when I write blog posts. It takes me a long time. So it's a skill though. None of us are just born doing it. You have to learn. And the reason why it is valuable is that if it's in your head and you die, nobody knows anything that you knew. And there's a lot of things that these brilliant engineers are doing that should be shared. Even if you're like, oh, it's just a variation of X, it's still from your perspective. And without your perspective, we're not going to be able to open up new pathways. The example that I give is that some of the newest discoveries in science, specifically at the microbiological level, has been from freshman students in college because they've seen it with fresh eyes for the first time. And even though you're not the master of it, the way that you approached it is valid, and you probably should share so that maybe these large companies that come up with these, or the small framework creators can look at that and say, oh, well, this was easy for these people, but not for that. That's a good way to refine it, instead of just doing it to one type of target market. So I just started encouraging the group around me, and slowly but surely I wore them down, with cookies and words of encouragement. Like, let's go, let's try it. And so I've had the pleasure of being able to see lots of people grow around me to where they have submitted and been accepted to conferences, not just in the States, but overseas. They've written lots and lots and lots of articles that I often reference from my own engineering work. And I finally got to see some people, branch out and do a little bit of video editing, like yourselves, and, put some things out on YouTube. And you'd be surprised, because the moment you do that and you start getting feedback from the community, you realize immediately the value of sharing that. You don't have to want to be a superstar. It's all about just sharing that knowledge. So that has kind of been the big focus for the past 3 years for me anyway.
Yeah, so I imagine that after you share that, you sort of grow in a little bit of visibility, individually. And so it's kind of funny, because like initially there's people that are trying to hold on to all their knowledge so that they can sort of, stay on top of the game, right? It's funny, if you actually let it go, you're probably going to be putting yourself in a better position from a visibility standpoint, anyways.
I think so. I think that's a fair point. I also think that it's really interesting. A lot of the hesitation comes from fear. I have some of the most brilliant professors I've ever met had a really hard time making the decision to go to that university, because they'd have to be in front of a room full of students, some of which are a little cheeky and tend to try to call you out for being wrong about something. I think that being concerned about the troll in the room stays with you for a while, but you find that because you're going up there and speaking at all, or putting something out there at all, people want you to be successful. They are giving of their time to either read your article, watch your video, or hear you speak. So they want to know what it is you have to say. So most people, I think, are on your side, and understanding that psychologically is usually the biggest barrier for most of the engineers I talk to. And then they're like, oh, well, that is kind of how I feel when I learn about this new thing, right? I never thought about it that way. I just think that I'm not the one who wrote the book on it. I'm like, yes, but that one person who wrote the book on it is too busy going over here and speaking, and going over there and speaking, or hiding out somewhere in Manitoba. And you just never know if they're going to come out and share. And I have found that doing any sort of immersive kind of communication of knowledge sharing, it just increases your ability tenfold, because then you get to have back and forth conversation, either in comments or after your talk or on the comments on your YouTube. And once that starts, then that really sparks another level of your knowledge. Then that starts making you think differently about how to back up what you are proposing, and to defend not just the way you approached it, but to also be more human about why you did it that way in the first place.
Yeah, and I find the tech community is becoming more inclusive and open and welcoming. Reaching out on Twitter to that technology expert could really help you solve a problem. And 9 times out of 10, they're more than willing to take just a few minutes of their time and respond to you or point you in the right direction.
Yeah, it is slowly but surely. I would say that our industry still has a little bit of a problem with sharing. Sometimes it can be really interesting when you are knee deep in a situation that you know a lot about, or you've had a lot of struggle with. I specifically think a lot about, ORMs and stuff like that. It can just be anything that you disagree with the architecture of, or the way something was structured. Sometimes that can be a tendency to bring out the worst in people online when they talk about something. But I have discovered that lately it has become a little bit more positive, every day, every week, about the way in which to talk about a subject matter. There are lots of good examples of authors and well-known speakers and pluralsight authors as well that will ask a question. Instead of saying, I think this sucks, they'll say, is there a different way to do X? And so then they'll get lots of responses, and it can be a natural and organic back and forth. And then I find that 9 times out of 10, it's not argumentative at all. It's just informative. Like, well, this is the approach I'm doing. And sometimes they're like, oh, well, yeah, it probably wouldn't work for that. Or have you heard of this or thought about this? They'll tag the other author of another framework and bring them in. And then it becomes an actual conversation everybody can have instead of just, this sucks, it's these people versus those people. There's a little bit of a turning of the tide, which is exciting to me to see that now a lot of the well-known people are starting to set a better example as to how to have that conversation.
Yeah, I used to have those ideas of, when I ran into a brick wall or started to get frustrated, then I would be mad at the framework or mad at the library maintainers or authors, until I realized that, I don't know what challenges they had to deal with to get that in place. I also realized that maybe I'm the one doing something wrong or not using it in the way that it was intended. So it's a lot easier just to reach out and ask for some help or say, this is the problem I'm having. What am I doing wrong? And, yeah, you might be doing something wrong, or there might be legitimate use case or bug or something that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, the protocol is definitely changing. I mean, how cool is it that we get to talk to each other on Twitter or something like that? It's interesting because it's also done publicly, so everybody can see it and also take that knowledge away, even if they don't partake in the conversation. So that's pretty cool. When I started, we definitely didn't have Twitter as an option to speak to authors of anything. Twitter was not the place for most of the text that I knew. It came back, like probably over the past 5 years, it's become more and more a place that more of us go. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
One of the things that I really liked you talking about in that sort of initial bit that you were speaking of was talking about how a lot of the innovations in microbiology is kind of coming from freshmen in college, and one of the things that I really like to point out to people is that innovation is always birthed out of inexperience, and this is like, if you have experience in it, it's not innovative, right? So someone has to have been doing this for the first time, and so you should never, no matter what experience you have, never limit yourself to what experiences you've already had, because you could definitely be the one kind of providing that innovation. How have you sort of encouraged people along these lines?
That was a question for me or for everyone?
Well, for anyone, yeah. But for you, if you have or whatever.
Encouraging innovation. Well, what's interesting is that sometimes you don't need to be prescriptive and say, I want you to build a thing using this framework doing X. Why don't you just say, here's a problem we're solving, go solve it. And you might be surprised as to what they're comfortable solving it with. It may or may not be with, a basic CMS. It could be in Python, surprise. But if it solved the problem, that's pretty cool. If that's also their opportunity to come back and ask clarifying questions and say, hey, well, I've never done anything with it, For instance, our clients don't care how we built this. They just care that we built this. They don't care how we made the AR happen on their phone. They just want the AR to happen on the phone. And they don't have an opinion as to whether or not we did that from a native library on our phones, or if we took a third-party library and we did it. They don't care. They just want this, and they have this date. Sometimes I think we can take a lesson from that, in that if you are a senior or an architect and you've got people underneath you, stop being prescriptive and telling them what to do. Mm-hmm. Just say, hey guys, this is a problem we have. I want suggestions, and start with the least experienced person first. Don't let anybody else go. They'll just go along with them. Start with the least experienced person and say, how would you solve this? And have it be collaborative, but make sure that you start with that person, because you'd be surprised the simplicity and the beauty of some of the things I have seen come out of that. Even the intern that recently that we had that now got converted. I mean, she went from doing regular development and straight into a DevOps role. Never done any sort of scripting, had no idea, but she was a dev to a point. She'd only done it for like a year or two, but she had enough understanding, but she didn't know anything about networking, had no idea about setting up pipelines, but she got really interested in terraforming. Using Terraform as infrastructure as code. She's like, that is cool. That's how I would do it. And so they went with that. I thought that was really cool, is instead of, hey, let's just take one of the 12,000 scripts we've written before over here in whatever language. She's like, well, how about we just use this program? Because that looks cool. And we can check it in and we can do code reviews and everything. So it was an interesting way to solve the problem. And I think you just kind of got to get out of the way and wait for the question. If they don't have a question, then give them a clarifying direction, but try not to just be prescriptive as, I am the big senior or the architect, and this is how I want to build this, is the wrong answer almost every time. I bet you that your team who's going to be building this for you has an idea about what would be simpler and less just complex overall. That's what I've taken away as a lesson for me, and I've seen it work in action.
Cool.
All right. So in public speaking, which you were talking about earlier, and also in the situations that you were just explaining, people often don't like to speak up because they think they might be wrong. Or often developers will feel like they must be inferior because the people on the internet are amazing. How do we deal with that? How do we overcome that problem?
That is the big question, isn't it? Well, I can tell you that regardless of your level of experience, that will hit you. And it's actually been shown scientifically that the more that you grow in your role, the less confident you feel that you know you have the answer. Because you're tested without question at some level, because you're the smartest one in the room, or you're the only one that's trusted with this particular level of severity. So you're it. And that can actually hit you the hardest, because then you're afraid to say anything. So you end up getting really cautious. And that is a natural progression that we as humans do. Well, now I have like the fate of all these people and this whole situation in this company, like a little bit in my hands. What do I do? So it doesn't just happen at the base levels. Let's all get that right. I mean, maybe you guys are all confident all the time. But I've spoken to enough senior people to know that it gets worse as you grow, because there are less of you to bounce ideas off of. It's just the way that it goes. There's also a little bit of a factor where if you're afraid to speak up because you don't want to be wrong, you can research one thing that you feel confident about. For example, I've never been good at giving code review comments because I don't want to piss anyone off. And I'm not as opinionated as other people. I just don't want to be like, oh, well, you didn't think about this whole thing that was written in this book that I never read, that they're doing. So the way that I dealt with that is, I know for sure that naming is hard, and I'm good at naming. I'm like, I would suggest that maybe this is rename this to be something more human-like so we can all understand it. And so that is one way to start getting your voice heard, in a way that you knew that that's something that everybody kind of subscribed to. Everybody kind of agrees. We want clean code, we want solid code. So we all know these things. And if you can speak up on those things, it shows that you are paid attention to detail, and it's something that everybody's already bought into, and it's not that controversial. And once you get used to saying something about that, it'll become natural. You'll be able to open up to the rest of the team or the people in front of you, and talk more. When it comes to an audience, you don't know them. You don't know who they are. Probably one of the coolest and most frightening experience in my life is I had somebody from Amazon, somebody from Google sitting in my front row. Had no idea who they were, but they were watching me talk about both of their products at the same time. That was exciting. That was exciting. And every time I have to be able to be prepared, I'm going to go out there, and you never know. Scott Hanselman could just be sitting in the front row. We just don't know. And I could be wrong about what I'm saying. But it's important to just come at it from using words like, this is my idea. It's kind of like in relationships with people outside of tech. You say prepositions like, I feel, this made me feel like X, or I think this is truth. This is 100% this. It says, in my experience with this situation, this is what I came to the conclusion of. Is most people, even if they're like, hey, actually, did you know you could do this, this, or that? A lot of people might stop and go, oh, great. See, I was wrong. I guess you can do that with this thing. And there's nothing wrong with calling that out and saying, that is really cool. I didn't know that. If you say that out loud, it shows you're a human being and you are continuously learning. It doesn't mean that what you're sharing isn't valid. So it's important to share something that you feel pretty confident on, meaning it might just take you Googling it and go into the documentation of it for sure to know. But usually once you start with a little thing, you can build on that confidence and handle it. I think we probably make it out to be a lot worse in our heads than it ever will be when somebody reads our article or hears us speaking on stage. I know for me, live coding is not something I've ever done until this last year because I didn't feel comfortable, because I knew for sure that something would go wrong and I would just be caught on stage, not remembering how to type, and all of this would go on, right? So what I did to help myself was a baby step. This is just an example of my situation, and it may or may not pertain to yours. I recorded everything I did. So I recorded it at home. I recorded me clicking things, moving things around, and I put it just in like an iMovie, and I stick it in a folder. And the moment it came time to share code, I just played the recording, walked out in front of the projector, and started pointing out things that were happening as it was going on behind me. Because the people who are trying to take in information don't care if it's live or not. They just care to get the information. And you standing there is just as valuable and as you going behind there and typing. The only way that it's even cooler is if you get like input from the audience. They're like, hey, use Apple in your array. I mean, okay, sure. But most of the time, I found that most people just wanted to know what it was, and it can get in the way of the communication if the internet goes out or your head kind of goes to another place, you forget where you are. That can be jolting. So I just found it to be easier to do that. However, on the other side of this spectrum, I mean, Jimmy Bogart is like the king of being able to do anything live. Doesn't matter, like the lights could go out and he would get everybody sitting in a circle with their phones and we would all be talking about big O notation. I mean, he's got this. But he's also a pro who's been doing this for like 20 years. So he knows how to communicate. But when you start, just put things in place so that you don't have to think about it so much, that it can make it just about the pieces that you know for sure were true for you, for your experience. Because that's really what we want, is we want to know what your experience was with this. All of us are smart enough, we'll take our own conclusions, but give us your experience. Don't worry so much about being right in all the ways. Be right in the ways that you discovered.
Hold on just 1 second.
I broke everything.
What'd you do, Clayton?
It's waiting for all the mics to be armed.
Armed?
Did you refresh? I've got an unfinalized track. Let me
Yeah,
finalize that.
no. So you typed something in the notes, and I tried to reply, and I stopped the recording.
Oh no!
It's only the podcast version of the recording. The YouTube is still going. So all the people on the YouTubes will see that I have messed up the recording.
Perfect.
I understand. I once did. I also, for the past couple of years, off and on do a show called the Hello World Show on YouTube. And we once interviewed somebody all the way, and none of our recording equipment worked because we were in another country, and they had all kind of popped there.
Oh no!
It was terrible. But we didn't know it because it only happens 10 seconds or 20 seconds after you start it. So I thought, okay, the framing looks good. We go over there, start talking. Whole thing was lost.
So Heather and Ash, can you go to
Refresh?
Zencaster and finalize your tracks, your wave tracks?
Yes, I'm doing that.
Okay, I need to finalize it. How do I do
Yeah,
that?
it's just there's a red box with a triangle. Just click on that. It says finalize when you hover over it, but not until. There we go. Yeah, I can't make a new recording until the old recording is finalized.
Oh no!
This has happened before, but we had to keep trucking along last time.
Well, how does that work?
We also record Zoom.
Oh,
So we have backups on backups.
Yep.
And because Ash's equipment always fails, he is also recording locally.
Yeah, I've had some bad luck with my equipment lately.
Okay, so I've got all of that going on. Do I need to do anything else from here?
Nope. I think we just
Looks like
wait
it's
for a
about-
second. I started
Great.
recording 2. There we go. Okay. It's running health checks. Okay. Recording 2 is going. So back up 5 seconds and
Yeah, we've not yet had the obligatory imposter syndrome episode, so it sounds like that's kind of wrapped in that scenario as well. I mean, I've been doing this. I'm in my 20th year of professional software development now, and more or less daily, I get a bout of imposter syndrome myself. So
It will increase as you do bigger and better things, especially if you take a risk. Because now you're risking not just like 1 year or 2 year, you're risking 20 years to be wrong, right?
Yep.
Right.
You just have to change your perspective on how you look at that. Because now I was like, oh my gosh, I've been a senior for a little while now. So I guess, what if I'm terrible at this after this many years, What if I'm really just not that good? And that's another thing I think that's really difficult is that what somebody values in you does not necessarily have to correlate to the way that you value your career. So one company might value your ability to constantly have meetings with them because you're over communicative and you're always available and you're never late. That might be what they value. But another company might think, I don't care if you work here or you work at home. All I care about is this goal over here. If we hit it, we're golden. But it's too isolating. You don't have enough communication, so you miss the mark. Everybody's kind of different. And so that is why where you work, and if you work for yourself, which is also a really big move, is an important step for you to identify what it is you want to do. There's so many different ways in which you can be a software engineer. I would say at first I was like, I want to make lots of money. I want to build cool stuff, but I don't want to give up either one of those things. Sometimes you'll give up one or the other. Sometimes it had a lot to do with choosing your boss and choosing your teammates. Sometimes you have no control over it. So at the end of the day, you kind of have to find out why you even get up in the morning and touch a keyboard and write code at all. At some point in time, you may have to leave writing code and let someone else write code, but you whiteboard with them or whatever. And you have to decide whether or not that's okay with you. I'm of the opinion that you should always at least play around and make something, once a quarter or something, just at home. It doesn't even have to be anything at work. Just to be like, look, I still make things. I still do this. But you are so valuable as you progress in your career. But you might be more valuable if you take your hands off that keyboard and allow someone else to do that.
Very cool. It kind of reminds me of the saying that says, the more you know, the more you don't know. The more you know, the more you know
that you don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
I think that's probably better. Yes.
So how about for the people that are just getting started? Maybe if you think back to when you were just getting started, what would you tell yourself now that you've had this experience? What would you tell yourself?
It's going to be okay. No one else knows what they're doing either.
it's true.
They will not tell you that they don't. And it may appear to you that they know more than you, which might be true, but they still are human beings and they make mistakes and often make mistakes. It's hard because when it depends on what kind of career path you choose, what kind of industry. But if we take it back, 1,000 years or so, let's pretend you are a blacksmith. There was a natural progression of mastery. There was like an internship, that apprenticeship, that journeyman. I can tell you the journeyman is this big. This is like the apprenticeship is this big, the journeyman is this big, and then mastery just kind of is the people who stuck it out and managed to do that up here. I would say the journey from year 1 to like 1.5 to 2 to plus is this enormous mid to senior group of journeymen that there are people that at some point in this will leave because it's too frustrating, it's too hard, whatever it is. The people who truly have achieved mastery, if you notice, they speak very simply about a lot of things. Once in a while, you'll see somebody who is revered as an expert on a subject matter, but they cannot communicate that. They can't really teach it. And so they are not masters yet. They are still journeymen. They just happen to be the most advanced journeymen in there, but they have not achieved mastery. Once you achieve mastery, that up there is when, that's where your professors come in. That's where people who are truly wise and can take a complex subject and explain it very simply to you so that you can get there on your own. Being a master is part of teaching. So if you don't know how to do that yet, you haven't reached it, which is kind of all ties back into as to why I think everybody should do some form of thought leadership, if nothing else, to get to that point, you know. And that starting that, you can start that at any point in your journey. So it is difficult. When I started, I was very freaked out for 3 reasons. Mine are different than yours would ever be, probably. But one is that I was 27 when I started coding. And that, I mean, is really hard because everybody else that I had met had been coding since they were, 15 years old, 13 years old. And they had always chosen this. But I came from a background that very much encouraged me not to go into STEM. So I didn't go into STEM because I wasn't encouraged to. Okay. So it took a lot to get over that. And, just secretly be pining away at all of the stuff that science is doing. And finally, I couldn't take it anymore and I had to do it. Right. There's that. My other thing is that I did it when I had no money and I had no way to really get a huge college education paid for, like a 4-year. So for me to take a leap into going into debt, even for just like a 6-month course, was a really big scare. And then, thirdly, it is difficult when people around you don't look or act like you and they don't have your history. And so regardless of whatever that is, I know that a friend of mine who is from South Australia, he's, came over here and he didn't feel like he belonged either because he liked to do a lot more outdoorsy stuff than the rest of the dev team. And so he felt very much the outside. And when you're in that position, it's very easy to feel like you're not going to make it. It's not for you, especially if somebody tells you it's not for you. But you get to decide if this is for you, independent of your job or your reimbursement for that job. Do you enjoy doing this? Any part of it. It doesn't have to be, do I enjoy writing software for an insurance company? Maybe that's not your specific jam, but how about, do I like solving complex problems for people that would otherwise, have their hands tied? Or that's more the questions that you should answer for yourself. And once you answer those questions, no amount of whatever is coming in is going to stop you from that. So I would definitely go back and say, going to be okay. Nobody else really knows. And because they don't really know what they're doing, they are not at that mastery. Therefore, they're going to say things to you that are not from a teacher's perspective, because it's more from, hey, I've climbed up here and it was hard for me, so it should be hard for you. I'm going to make it hard for you. I'm going to tell you how wrong you are and to rethink all this stuff. But really, that's not what a master would do. So you just have to be aware of where they are in their journey and where you are in yours. And it's okay that it's different.
Awesome. Do you have any upcoming speaking engagements or anything like that you would like to plug?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So if you're interested in anything that I'm going to go speak at, if you go to my website, it's coraline.com/appearances. I actually do that for me, not for anybody else, but it's more because I can't remember sometimes what I do. I have a terrible memory, small cache, So, but the next one I have coming up is kind of cool. I've got a couple of things in Sweden in basically 2 weeks. One of them is called SweetHug. The other one is JFocus. And JFocus is a Java event. SweetHug is a .NET event. So that's pretty cool to do. And then after that, I actually am going to be speaking in Copenhagen at NDC. So that's going to be fun for that. But in terms of the States, I mean, I'm very excited to be speaking, in all sorts of different user groups and everything. I've got so much up there. Please go look at it.
Awesome.
Lots of wonderful things coming up.
Awesome. And how about if people would like to follow you or just get in touch with you, how might they be able to do that?
I usually respond pretty quickly on Twitter, but if it needs to be more of a private one-on-one, you can email me as well. And so my email is coraline@gmail.com, or my Twitter handle is Coraline. And the way it's spelled kind of harkens back to my origin story. So Coraline is like Cora from Tron, so Quorra, and then Lyne, and like Coraline with the movie. So
Cool.
back when in my age, we had handles on IQ, you know, back in the day. For those who don't know, ICQ was a messaging service that we.
Very nice. Well, thank you very much, Heather.
Thank you, guys. It was great talking to you.
That was Heather Downing. Heather is a passionate coder and entrepreneur. She has experience working with Fortune 500 companies, building enterprise-level voice, mobile, and C#.NET applications. She focuses on external thought leadership, encouraging fellow programmers to present on topics outside of the office and in the community.
If you like this episode, please like, rate, and review on iTunes.
Find show notes, blog posts, and more at sixfiguredev.com.
And be sure to follow us on Twitter @sixfiguredev.
This has been another episode of the Six Figure Developer Podcast, helping others reach their potential. I am John Calloway.
I'm Clayton Hunt.
And I'm John Ash.